Hey guys, Trevor with Shadow Systems. It's Technical Tuesday, and today we're going to respond to some questions that we've had about our warranty and why hand-loaded ammunition violates our warranty. So I'm actually going to begin today's episode with a story from my youth. So there I was a brand new reloader. I was 14 years old, and I worked construction in the summer. And I was having a conversation with the air conditioning tech one morning, and I was excitedly telling him how I was a new reloader. And he said, Trevor, let me give you some advice. He said, don't drink beer and reload. I know, that's pretty profound. I'll let that sink in for a minute. So he said, I was shooting my .44 Magnum. I fired the first round and it just made a little pop. And then I fired the next round and it damn near tore my arm off. Well, we're going to talk about what happened to that gentleman. And we're going to talk about why that is the core of our policy on hand-loaded ammunition. Before we do that, though, I just want to maybe make a point to keep it all in context. We are not alone in having a policy for our warranty that says that hand loads essentially void the warranty. So here's a 6 Sauer manual. 6 Sauer specifically disclaims responsibility for any damage or injury whatsoever, blah, 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 occurring in connection with reloaded or remanufactured, hand-loaded, etc. ammunition. So they actually include remanufactured ammunition too. Glock also does. They've got a policy that's pretty similar. Do not use reloaded, remanufactured, or hand-loaded ammunition. Use of reloaded, remanufactured, or hand-loaded ammunition will void the warranty. Smith & Wesson has something similar. They call it improper ammunition, and they identify reloads as kind of being in that category. So, I'll say it a few times in this video. I have shot a lot of reloaded ammunition. That's been great. I've been reloading for a long time, but not everybody does it the same way, and we're going to go into some detail today and show you exactly why this is the policy. We're going to actually go to the reloading bench, and we're going to load some ammo, and we're going to show how that process can go awry and result in a dangerous situation. We're going to use that sample ammunition from that reloading session to actually go shoot one of these guns live and demonstrate how it can be destructive to the firearm, and then we'll come back afterward for some closing comments. Okay, so now we're actually at the reloading bench, and I'm going to walk through some of the places where this can kind of go wrong. I want everyone to understand this is not a public service announcement against reloading. I have been reloading since I was 14 years old. It's been a great pastime that I've enjoyed a lot. It's enabled me to shoot a whole lot more than I otherwise would have because, you know, ammunition is substantially more affordable when you're reloading, but not every reloader is the same, and not everybody has the same kind of approach to it that I've had, which for me has yielded safe results, but it's not always that way. So I want to show you guys kind of how it can go wrong so you understand the thought process that we went through when saying that hand-loaded ammunition would violate or would void the warranty. Okay, so really I'll just kind of walk through it and stop in places where things could get weird. So, hey, I got my trusty reloading manual, and I'm going to start reloading the 9mm. This one is from like 1996, but the data should still be good, right? Well, there's a few powders that have actually changed over time. So even though it might be marketed under the same brand and the same product name, it may actually be a little different than when it was formulated in 1996. All right, probably still fine. It's just a factor worth mentioning. All right, so I set my reloading manual down and I grabbed my powder. I've selected Vitifiore N320 for this. And I go ahead and I pour some in my powder measure, right? Well, I set my powder measure up last time, and I know that this is the right powder. So I go ahead and pour some in and cap it off, and now I'm ready to load. Well, there's another place that it could go wrong, right? So let's just pretend that I actually grabbed the wrong powder, and that can happen too. And now all of a sudden I've got a situation where, you know, maybe I've got the charge bar set to load, you know, 40 Smith & Wesson or something, and I'm getting ready to load 9mm, or maybe I've got, you know, the charge bar set to load tight group powder, but I just loaded Vitifiore powder, and I'm going to have the wrong powder charge. So those are both cases where that could kind of go wrong. Okay, so, but let's just say I've done the right thing. I usually write the load data from my last loading experience on the powder measure, so I know what it is. And I also have a scale set up, so I'm actually going to check it because even though I'm really confident, I want to make sure that what's coming out of here is what I expect when I go to the scale. But maybe not everybody does that because they've done it so many times and they've never had a problem, right? Okay, so this is a sophisticated progressive reloader that has a whole lot of safety checks built into it. They're not all like that. This would be a more simple turret style press that doesn't auto index, that doesn't have a powder check. So I'm going to show you what's built into this press, and we're going to kind of hear alarms and we're going to stop when something is going wrong, but realize that, you know, the vast majority of presses out there probably aren't this sophisticated and probably are more like this, right? Okay, so the two scenarios that we're kind of worried about here where we get the gun to blow up are either excessive pressure, where there's too much powder, or maybe the wrong powder. And then the other scenario is actually the absolute opposite, right? We've talked about this, the squib load, where you've got not enough powder to get the bullet out of the barrel. Enough powder maybe to push it down the barrel so you can load another round behind it, but not enough to get it out of the barrel. Okay, so let's go ahead and start reloading. So why don't you come down here and you can kind of see the process. It's already picked up the first piece of brass, and this is not a reloading lesson, so I'm gonna go kind of fast here. That alarm you just heard actually was the powder check die on this press. Because this station hasn't been filled yet, there's no powder charge, so it's letting me know that there's no powder charge. Okay, that first pull resized the casing and it has just advanced to the powder die. So now I'm gonna dump my powder charge. Okay. It's still alarming because, again, it's expecting there to be a powder charge in that station and there's not one. Okay, I'm advancing again. All right, so I've now got 3 pieces of brass on there. One of them there is about to get resized. One of them is just been primed and is about to get the powder, and that one has the powder in it. Now, here's what I want to point out. So you'll notice that this particular powder charge in this particular case fills more than half of the case. So that's a good thing. And the reason I call that out is it's not always like that. So there are certain cases that have substantially more capacity than a 9mm. So a 38 Special would be an example, 45 ACP would be an example. And there are certain powders that are very fast burning that have very light charges. So typically, if you have a slower burning powder, you will consume more of the case capacity than with a fast burning powder. That matters because if we have a fast burning powder with a very small charge, it's possible to potentially get multiple charges in the same casing. The classic example of that is the 38 Special. Guys used to load bullseye powder, which was a tiny powder charge. And the 38 Special having the case capacity that it does, guys were blowing up their guns shooting light loads because they would fit like 4 or 5 charges in the same casing. And it can happen, okay? This case is good because if I were to somehow dump an extra powder charge, it's going to spill out of the case mouth and be very obvious. Okay, so I like to load powders that consume more than half of the case capacity. So if I do somehow dump an extra charge in there, it's not going to, it's going to be obvious. Okay, so what's about to happen now when I pull this lever is the powder check die is going to check the powder charge. Okay, you'll know that there's no alarm right now. If for some reason it was wrong, it would alarm like that, okay? Now, again, that's a pretty sophisticated piece of equipment that most folks don't have. So, you know, if this setup was in here and I had a double charge in there or I had no charge in there, we wouldn't know it. We wouldn't hear anything, okay? We would have to visually catch it as we went. All right, so we've got the powder check die. It's just checked the charge. And now I'm advancing. I'm going to stick my first projectile in, and off we go. And we are officially now loading ammunition. Okay, great. You can see how it would be pretty hard to screw this up, right? You can see how, even though it's very complicated, you'd almost have to work at it to get the machine to dump an extra charge or to have a low charge. Maybe. So let's talk about how you might end up with a low charge. Okay, because there is a case where that could happen with this press. And in many ways, for the 9mm, that's the more dangerous scenario because we just established that it's kind of unlikely that you're going to fit a full double charge in there and not see it. but it is certainly possible to get a light load in there. Okay, so what can happen? Well, let's just pretend that our reloader is consuming powder. He's reloading, going along, and I'm going to actually empty this powder measure out to kind of simulate consumption of the powder. And by the way, as I do this, here's kind of a key point. Another opportunity to screw this up is when the guy is dumping the powder back in the jug, he accidentally puts the wrong powder in the wrong jug. So then you end up with kind of a mix of powders in the same jug, which obviously could produce some pretty bad results. Okay, so I'm going to pour this back in here. And again, the purpose of this is just to simulate what happens when we've loaded a lot of powder. Now there are alarms that also are keeping track of the amount of powder in your powder measure to make sure that you don't run out. Okay, but I don't have one, and there's times when I've actually kind of run it pretty low before I've caught the fact that it's low. So let's just pretend we've consumed most of our powder. Okay, and we'll put this back on. Kind of trying to move quick here for you guys. So we don't know really what's left in the bottom of this, but I bet you there's enough to dump a charge, or a partial charge. And that partial charge, maybe 1 or 2 grains out of the 4 that should be there, is the scenario that we're concerned about. So let's see what happens. I'm going to go ahead and keep reloading. Here comes around. Okay, I just dumped whatever was left in that powder measure right there. Okay, and I'm going to load around there. I've checked that one. I know that one's good. Okay, this is going to alarm for us because it's a light charge. But again, let's pretend we didn't have that feature. Okay. All right, let's look down inside this case. See how there's just barely any powder in there? I know it's hard to see. Well, that extremely light charge is probably like the perfect squib load. So I'm going to actually load this one just so I have it for our test later today, because I'm curious to see what it is. I just seated the bullet. I'm watching closely. It is about to get crimped, and I'm going to put it in my pocket. Okay, so there's your perfect example of a squib load. Okay, now again, I removed the powder check die to facilitate it, but if you don't have that feature, that can go wrong. And there's just a little bit of powder in there. All right, you can see how it would be even easier on a press like this to screw some of this stuff up. So over here, this one is set up for a rifle. I was loading some 308 ammo, but there's no auto index, okay? It's just resize and prime, drop powder where you could potentially drop multiple in the same station. Of course, you can have an automated powder measure too that drops for you, but it could drop multiple because I could just keep doing this if I wasn't paying attention. And it does an auto index. So it's 3 pulls of the lever for every round. And that just means there's more opportunity for one of those operations to get screwed up, or more opportunity to drop 2 charges or not a charge or whatever. Okay. So, so that's kind of why we have concerns about what goes on in your garage when you're loading ammo. And for big companies that manufacture ammunition, they have so much at stake from a liability perspective that they're going to stay in safe parameters, that they're going to have safeguards in there. And they also have much more sophisticated equipment. I mean, stuff that makes this look like a joke. And that's pretty sophisticated for the kind of private reloader doing it at home. So it's really about the level of focus and sophistication that goes into making the ammunition, and that's why factory ammunition is required for your warranty to remain in force. Okay, so we're out at the range. We're going to try first with the severely overloaded round. So, like I said, when we were talking about reloading, I really couldn't get a full double charge in here, so I just packed it as fast as I could. I used the tightest powder that I had in stock, which was, or the fastest powder that I had in stock, which was Tight Group. So we're gonna go ahead and load this thing up, and we'll see what a severely overloaded round does. All right. Make sure that GoPro's going. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. All right. Well, I gotta be honest, I'm pretty surprised. so I sort of thought we would see a little something. The round definitely shows signs of high pressure on the primer, but it ejected actually. To be honest, we did this one other time with another severely overloaded round, and it locked in the breech, but it also didn't break the barrel. So I think that we can generally say that, at least for the powders that I have, if you overload it substantially, you know, you might damage some components, but it doesn't look like the gun will actually come apart. So now let's try it with the squib load. I think that's going to be a little better. Okay, so now we're going to do our squib load scenario. So as a reminder, this is a case where we have a really small powder charge that doesn't drive the bullet out of the barrel, but drives it far enough to where it is in the middle of the barrel somewhere, and the next round can be chambered behind it. So the main thing to listen for here is I want you to hear the sound. If you ever hear a really small, kind of quiet report on a gun, you got to check the barrel for an obstruction before you chamber that next round, okay? This is one that's avoidable if you're paying attention. So I've got a Federal HST. That's going to be the one that comes in behind the squib load, and then I've got a squib load that we loaded yesterday. Okay, so let's go ahead and chamber this round. So again, this is our first round that's going to be a squib. This is what you should be listening for. Start that. Okay, so let's check the bore for an obstruction and see how far down that went. Okay, it is all the way almost at the muzzle. It's about like the worst case scenario, because you can definitely get around behind this. Okay, so the bullet's right there. So we'll go ahead and chamber this next round, and then we'll get behind cover and we'll fire it. All right, I think we're set. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. All right, so that's about what we expected. The top of the barrel has split, the top of the slide has split, and it looks like it's come off the receiver. The good thing to see here is that the operator's hand would have been protected by the frame, so it's likely that the person would have been okay, but certainly a scary situation, and you guys can see how this happens now when you have a squib load. All right, listen for that quiet report. Don't chamber another round if you ever find yourself in this situation. Hey, so I hope that was informational. It took some doing to put all that together. We wanted to show you exactly why this is our position and why hand-loaded ammunition is prone to potentially damaging your firearm. Again, there are lots of great rounds that are fired every year that are hand-loaded, and I've shot a lot of them. But as a matter of policy, we cannot honor the warranty when damage was done by reloaded or hand-loaded ammunition. Okay? Final comment, if you ever hear that quiet report, if the gun doesn't cycle and it just sounds like a little pop, maybe a puff of smoke, which seems to also accompany those, stop what you're doing, check the bore for an obstruction, and make sure you're safe. All right, we will see you next Tuesday.